the fourth episode of Understanding Woburn's Community Preservation Act. Today, we would like to thank Representative Jay Kaufman and Senator Ken Donnelly to our show, and to thank them for taking the time to come here this evening.
The Community Preservation Coalition has been working very closely with Representative Kaufman on further CPA legislation that is currently before the Joint Revenue Committee, of which Representative Kaufman is the House Chair. Representative Kaufman, can you tell us about your initiation of the CPA many years ago?
Well, I had the honor and pleasure of being in the legislature when the Community Preservation Act was first proposed and passed. And at the time, we were trying to sort of address a number of issues, none of which we could address independently. One was the inadequate funding for historic preservation, inadequate funding for open space, inadequate funding for affordable housing, and inadequate funding for local aid. Those are all big problems. And with the invention of this Community Preservation Act, we found a way to address all three of them, all four of them at the same time, by having communities opt into a program, raise some matching money so that we could provide more state money for those key public services, because we clearly need some more money for open space. Did then, we still do, need more money for historic preservation. And it's a program that has allowed us to send some state money to local communities and provide a great deal of new development that otherwise wouldn't happen. My home community is Lexington. We were one of the first communities to get in, and the number of projects that we have been able to undertake that we would not have been able to do absent that state funding is just, it's long. I don't even know the number anymore, but it's big.
We've heard some
We've heard about it, yes.
about Lexington.
Oh, it's just, I mean, it's amazing. And it's a gift that keeps giving. So every year at town meeting, we have more and more projects that are being proposed that, but for the funding from the Community Preservation Act, wouldn't even be on the drawing board.
Okay.
Thank you.
Both Representative Kaufman and Senator Donnelly were co-sponsors of the legislative amendments to CPA that were passed in 2012, and that broadened the allowable uses of the CPA for outdoor recreational projects, and it provided surplus funding for the statewide Community Preservation Trust Fund, and passed other technical fixes to the CPA that made the program more attractive to cities. Did you find when this went through that that you were getting pushback from the city that was turned around once it was implemented?
I didn't see any pushback at all. That was, I believe that was some of the issues that we deal with in the legislature. This was a bipartisan issue. And I think everybody that has been familiar with the Community Preservation Act, whether they're Democrat or Republican, have supported it because it really makes a lot of sense. And the reason some of the changes, and I know that Jay can probably talk a little bit better of it, being the chair of the Revenue Committee, I was chair of a different committee, that there was some question about the sports facilities and what could be, what could be used in the Community Preservation Act. And I think that the changes were very popular and worked well.
Okay, that's great to know. I had understood that people were surprised at how wonderful it was. And I'm actually thrilled that it is not, it's not even bipartisan, it's nonpartisan.
That's
and that's
true.
Great.
Yeah.
It's very unusual.
Okay, and I understand, this was something I learned today, that there's legislation to provide a minimum 50% CPA trust fund distribution for all 158 CPA communities is being considered on Beacon Hill. And both of you co-sponsored that bill, I read today.
Well, in a sense, the biggest problem we have is because of the success of the Community Preservation Act. At the beginning, there was a fair amount of money in the trust fund divided amongst a relatively small number of communities. Now, with every passing year, other communities join in. They take votes of the sort that Woburn is about to face. Most of those votes wind up with an affirmation of the decision to join the Community Preservation Act coalition. So the pie, ever too small, gets divided that many more ways every time another community comes in. So we actually now because of the fact that the coalition is growing, we need to find some way to expand the pie and find some new sources of revenue for the Community Preservation Act communities. And I think that's going to be an ongoing challenge, but one that we will hopefully be able to address.
It gets back to what we said before. It's nonpartisan or bipartisan, and we find and we see a lot of support in the legislature, in the Senate, in the House for the Community Preservation Act, because it really has, if you look at New England, what we have that's unique is our historic buildings, our history. You know, you can go anywhere and see, you know, the buildings and be in cities, but in New England, our special places, the historic value of the historic buildings we have, and the open space. And I think that what a lot of communities have found out is to preserve that when there's a real challenge for tax dollars works out so well, especially when there's matching money, not completely matching, but there's money from the state, or another form of local aid.
Right, as well as the ability to leverage grants
Right.
with CPA
Right.
funds.
That's right.
And we certainly have our historic structures here in Woburn.
The library.
The library
is
is a
the
big
first one that
one.
comes to mind, of
Yeah.
course.
Yes.
Yeah, and we, in Lexington, when I say we, because I represent Lexington, Jay, one of the buildings they just did over, they did the seniors, they just built a community center, or they just purchased a community center. Beautiful building in the Masons, the old Masons building.
And
They
the
just-
National Heritage Museum in Lexington was a facility that was owned by the Masons, and it was just bought by the community and completely refurbished as a community center. Would not have happened but for the state support for the Community Preservation Act. It was expensive. Taxpayers paid part of it, but our investment was added to by the Community Preservation Act fund.
So
So-
projects that might not be a priority for the town because they have other more pressing needs, but really enhance your community can
I
be.
think that's one of the things that I find that we need to address a lot of times, that the people out there have a tendency to think that these projects are not priorities. They are. And eventually would have to either, they would lose or they'd have to use taxpayer dollars to purchase them. And I don't know of any projects that I can think of that any of the communities that were not priorities or not necessary. It's just that the limited amount of dollars,
Right.
Right.
it becomes very difficult, especially, but with doing it this way, you have that pool of money to be able to make these purchases. But I know in Lexington, listen to the town meeting, they renovated, I think, 3 buildings that they would have had to do, but they did it, and part of it was with community preservation money. And that's why I think in Arlington, there was this, a heated debate on it, and it passed. And I think the point, and I supported it. I wouldn't even begin to tell the people of Woburn how to vote. What I can say, though, is as a resident of the town of Arlington, I voted for the Community Preservation Act and supported it.
That's great. I actually saw part of that debate. It was on YouTube. What would you say to people who oppose the CPA?
Well, I think that, the people are concerned, there are people that are concerned about the taxes, but I think that in the Community Preservation Act, there's so many good parts to say that if you're low income, you have an exemptions. If you're, the first $100,000 of residential, you're exempt. I think that when people have put it together, they understand that there are people that have some concerns and may have some inabilities to pay it. But for the amount of money, I think in the, $20, $27 on the
Yeah,
average
Depending on the
tax rate.
percentage, but that's what it is here.
It really, you have to understand, if you want a community that is a vibrant community that people want to live in, you have to make the investment. I was driving home from a place up in New Hampshire early this morning. I got up at 4:30 this morning to come home. But it was interesting. I drove from northern New Hampshire all the way to the Massachusetts border, and I never went less than 65 miles an hour, but there was no traffic. you come into Massachusetts, there's traffic, because people want to live here, work here, and they want to raise their families here. And to make that something that people want to continue to do, we have to continue to invest in open space in, our historic buildings.
And Woburn has such a rich history and just so much that needs to be saved. I mean, even the canals and all of the things that are uniquely Woburn. So.
Very true.
Yeah, I think that the simple answer to your question is we all love to hate taxes, but that's a given.
Yeah.
But the absence of funds to pay for things that we care about is a real problem for all of us. And I think Ken spoke to it perfectly. This is an investment for the community, by the community, in the community. And taxes are the price we pay for having community.
And it's also something that's totally transparent. The public sees it from start to finish. When they can go up before the CPA committee and propose a project, John Doe, who lives on Salem Street, can walk in and say, I've got an idea for a project, and that person will be heard, and their project will be evaluated. And if it goes through, it'll go to the city council in a public meeting.
Yes.
And, so it's all really transparent to the public.
Plus, people, obviously the revenue comes from selling, when you sell property.
Right.
Which is a time when you tend to be a little flusher with cash than you otherwise would be. But the amount of money that's going to go into this fund is proportional to the size of your property, or at least the value of your property. So the larger properties, the more expensive properties, are going to wind up providing greater resources for the community. And the people with smaller homes are going to provide that much less. That's fair.
There's been a lot of misunderstanding, misinformation about how it works. Maybe we could explain, one of you could explain it a little bit, or we could. That it's a surcharge. We're going for just 1% here, so that's a 1% surcharge on your annual property taxes. And the state share comes from the usually $20 fee on the
excise fees.
Right, the excise fees. Right, exactly. But
the original thought was to have a surcharge, if you will, on the sale of property. That was turned back. That was rejected when the legislation was initially passed. But that ultimately would be the fairer way to raise money, and it would also be a good way to raise more money than on the modest kind of fees that we pay when we have a new deed or
Right.
transfer a deed or something of that sort. So that's part of the ongoing challenge. The source of state match is really inadequate to the number of communities that are now joining. So we're going to have to
Right.
come back and have that debate so that when Woburn votes for this, if Woburn votes for this, there's a pot of money that the community can turn to.
Interestingly enough, Arlington did pass it, and Arlington is a little more challenged than Woburn when it comes to tax revenues. Arlington is 95% residential, 5% commercial, and I represent communities in Burlington. I have Burlington. Burlington is doing tremendous with all of the business and businesses, and Woburn has a very good tax rate compared to the other, some of the other communities I represent. And it's a great place to live. My daughter lives here, and my brother lived here. My other brother lives here, and the tax rate is a lot
better than
less
ours.
than mine, or Jay's. But again, people want to live in these communities, and there's a reason why they want to live in them. And you have to keep making sure that people want to live in them.
There's also, CPA is good for businesses, and that's something that has been challenging for us to project onto the businesses so that, June, you've talked about that some. Can you?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the business community doesn't see how the CPA is going to benefit them. They see it, this is just another tax for us. How would you respond to that?
Well, I think Ken, again, spoke very eloquently to the sort of quality of life that you buy when you have something like the Community Preservation Act. If you have more affordable housing, you're a more diverse and wealthier in a sociological sense community. If you have open space, clearly people want that if you have better recreational facilities, clearly people will move into town where they can take their kids to better soccer fields and the like. All those things are a part of the quality of life, and I think many people, if not most people in the business community, can see that. It's part of the equation that brings people into their stores and into their businesses.
Right, exactly.
It's interesting, like, there was an article in the paper the other day about the restaurants coming to Burlington. High-end restaurants. They said,
saw
it's not
that.
the South End, they're coming to Burlington. And Woburn, by the way. And I think that it's all part of that. They're great places to live and raise families. And that's what attracts people into this area to live and work here. So I think that the businesses, for businesses that understand that, I don't see why they would not support the CPA.
Because they can definitely benefit.
Absolutely.
It also provides a pool of educated, vibrant people to their businesses as employees and as well as customers.
Right, they always prefer to have employees who live close
Right.
by in the community, preferably.
Absolutely.
You did mention affordable housing, and 40B is another issue we talk about here in Woburn.
Another problem.
Maybe one of you could explain it briefly, and then we could talk about how CPA could impact it.
And what is this 40B anyway?
Okay, well, the 40B is a provision in state law that basically allows a developer to come into a community and invent their own zoning, basically violate the community's zoning regulations if the community has not met a state set target for the percentage of affordable housing in the housing stock. Most communities, many communities have not reached that target, which is 10%. I frankly don't know that Woburn has reached that target. I think it has not.
We have not.
They were certainly pretty far from it last time I looked.
And they're building like crazy.
So
Right.
until 10% of the housing stock here is considered affordable, Woburn will continue to be at the mercy of developers coming in and building these large-scale developments with the local zoning board, the local city council having no authority whatsoever over those developments. So if the hope here is by providing more affordable housing through the Community Preservation Act, we, or the citizens of Woburn, can take back control over their own housing stock.
Yep.
It's what's in a very there's a heated debate going on in Arlington right now. It's called the Mugar property. It's off of Route 2. And there's a proposal to develop it. Now, it's a very economically, environmentally sensitive area with wetlands. And there's a huge concern because when the whole area gets flooded with storms, but the developer come in, and Arlington's only 5.5% at the 40B level. And it looks like this developer there's a possibility they're going to be able to build 220 units in this little space in Route 2, near Route 2,
boy.
where, the open, not only is it open space, and the people of Arlington aren't just saying, NIMBY, not in my backyard. There is really a major concern about the environment and the water that's going to happen. The problem is that they didn't, if they had the opportunity, they could try to build in affordable housing to the point where they were at that 10%. They wouldn't be at the mercy of the developers because the regulations, if you're below that 10%, you really run up against the fact that you have a very hard time saying no.
If we have one of those projects here in Woburn, I think they nicknamed it the Ledges up in North Woburn.
Yes,
Right.
that's right.
Exactly
That's
right.
where they're doing the rock excavating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And-
Ken and I were just at a groundbreaking, 2 weeks ago in Lexington for another house that will be an affordable, a house that a family can move into that otherwise would have no chance of moving into Lexington or any of the communities around here. And the funding for that is provided in part through the Community Preservation Act.
That's
so
terrific.
for affordable housing, we're not talking about things like Section 8. We're talking about a percentage of it. How does that work? What's the formula?
Well, they have a formula on the the amount of money, median income in the
Median
town,
household
plus
income.
rental, plus property value?
You know, I don't remember the exact formula,
Right.
but basically.
There is one.
Right.
There is a formula, and I think I should know it, but I can't cite it from memory. And you need to have a fairly decent income before you're considered able to go out into the marketplace and buy houses. I mean, how many of us are just sort of scraping by and, you know, barely able to afford the mortgages we're paying?
Right.
A lot of people are in worse shape than any of us are, and in order to get them into a community so that you have a diverse community, there is this provision for affordable housing, so that there's a cap to how much rent can be charged.
Right, right.
But you have to have an income, you have to pass an income test. You have to have a certain amount, but not too much,
Right.
Right.
in order to qualify for this affordable
Yeah.
housing.
So
So you-
you're talking about middle-class people.
Right.
You're talking about-
Absolutely
yeah.
middle-class people.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You've got to have a job, I mean, all sorts of, you've got to be able to prove that you can pay the rent.
right.
Or the mortgage, depending on whether it's a sale or a rental. So we're absolutely talking about middle class, and, you know, we could have a
Those
long
are the people
conversation
you
about
want.
how increasingly stressed the middle class is.
Right.
Right, how difficult it can
Yeah,
be.
we can have a
This-
whole-
This is absolutely a middle class.
Yeah, we can have a whole
Preservation
discussion.
Act.
We can have a whole discussion on the 40B and
Yep.
how that works, but
Right.
it'd be a lot more, you know, I think that we could get into that for,
I'd have to
Yeah,
go-
you
I'd
can
have
get
to
in
go
the
back and
weeds
get-
with that.
And I have to go back and make sure that I understood, not that I understand, but that I could cite the weeds.
But it
But-
is an issue for CPA, and CPA could, because of the affordable housing component of CPA, it gives us an opportunity to boost our percentage of affordable housing and avoid 40B.
To get to 10%.
And the community will still have complete control over whether it's rental housing or
Right.
sale. It will have complete control over its one bedroom for a single person or a couple,
Or
or for
families.
families.
Right.
All of that is still
Or
within.
or elder housing.
Or elder housing. All of those are legitimate policy debates that should go on here in Woburn.
Whereas with 40B, you have very little
have no
say.
control.
Yeah.
Right,
No.
none at all.
It's whatever the developer thinks
Yeah.
they can get away with in the marketplace.
And they come in, I noticed this is a little bit of an aside, but I noticed, because I was at the hearings for 40B in Woburn, they come in and they bid on a project that's approved and then decide a few months later that it's not affordable and they get it boosted and there's nothing you can do.
Right. It's been known to happen like that.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it's just, I mean, I think the reason that there have been attempts to change the legislation that created 40B over the years is that increasingly communities are facing what Woburn is now facing, that they realize they're over a barrel.
Yeah,
and if you don't have provisions that says that once they build the affordable housing, it has to be into perpetuity, then after 25 years, it may no longer be part of that affordable housing
That's
mix.
with the 40B.
With the
That's right.
40B.
That's a
So
point
it
I
may
wanted to
not be
bring up,
part of that
yes.
percentage. So you may have gotten to 10%, but keep dropping down because if you don't have a provision that says that if you build it and you get the permit to build it, it has to be in perpetuity, then it's 25 years. So I
And-
don't know if Woburn has done that or not, but
the
Good
other thing
question.
is if they're at 10% of what they build, that's spinning wheels. That doesn't get you ahead.
advance, that's
Right,
right.
right.
It doesn't
Yeah.
advance the argument.
Right,
No,
doesn't
that's
help.
right.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So,
But that's what, you know, if the developer feels it's in his or her best interest to only do 10% because there's much more profit in market rate housing than there is in affordable housing,
course.
then why would they do more? That's the way the market works, which is why there's
Right.
got to be
They're
some
in it.
intervention here.
They're there to make money.
And why having the Community Preservation Act, among other things, gives the community some control over this.
Now, what if people watching say, well, Lexington, Arlington, those aren't Woburn? You know, I can see why they might want the CPA. Why would Woburn want the CPA?
well, I think when you say, you know, and I try to, I guess I would say what I said earlier, Lexington, Arlington, it's not Woburn. It's all in the greater Boston area that's so close together, and any place else, it would probably be part of the city. So, I mean, Woburn is, I don't see much difference between, you know, Lexington, Billerica, Burlington, Woburn, Arlington. They're beautiful communities. They're all very similar. They have beautiful greens. They have families that really, you know, have education is so important to the people in these communities, all 5 of those communities. So when people, there may be some people say Woburn is not Arlington or Lexington or Burlington or Billerica, but having represent all 5 of them, I see that they're all wonderful communities, and they're all very similar in so many different ways. They all have the same beautiful historic buildings. They have open space. They're great places for people to work, live, and raise a family. So when someone says Woburn's different, it really isn't.
Yeah. I also, first of all, I agree with that completely. Issues of affordable housing, issues of local aid, issues of open space, issues of historic preservation, those are, there's no difference in Woburn than there is Lexington, Woburn, Arlington, they're all the same with regard to those issues being issues that we care about. The other thing that I noticed this very directly 13 years ago when I was first on the ballot in Lexington. I'm sorry, first on the ballot from Lexington in Woburn, and there was an enormous amount of acculturation that had to occur, and it probably took close to 8 or 10 years before I was regarded as a human being as opposed to somebody.
We know that one.
Right.
That's
so,
what we were getting at.
I
So
moved in
there-
1992, and I'm a carpetbagger.
Yes, we're all
Yes.
carpetbaggers.
Well, and I just, I care deeply about citizens of Woburn, although I don't pay taxes here. But it took a long time before the conversation was about issues that we have in common as opposed to just, oh, you're an outsider.
Mhm.
So I think back to Ken's point, the issues that Woburn is confronting here are issues that Woburn ought to be considering in its own terms, not because Lexington has done it, not because Arlington has done it, but does it work for Woburn? And we're here to tell you that we think it does.
And there are lots of people moving into Woburn because it does have so much going for it. It has the low tax rate. It can be a little more affordable than some of the surrounding communities.
And you can get anywhere from here because of 93 and 95.
Location's
It's
great.
a perfect
Not to mention public
location.
transportation, which we do not have.
Right, it's
in
very good,
Lexington.
too.
So there are lots of reasons to move to Woburn.
Yep. It's a pretty city, too. Yeah.
It is,
I love
because
my
it's
city.
older. I like the fact that it's in lots
Well,
of
the
old
library
houses.
here is one of the most beautiful buildings around.
It's
Or it
gorgeous.
was. It needs a lot of work,
Yeah,
but
but it's
it can be
still,
again,
it
so.
still has the framework of a beautiful
Oh,
old
my God, yes.
Richardson building that
Yes.
Woburn's very proud of.
and should be.
So,
It is. And
So-
with any luck, if Woburn citizens are able to pass this time around, the Community Preservation Act this time around, there's some funds there that can help restore that old beautiful Richardson building.
Absolutely.
so.
Anything else you'd like to add or talk about that we haven't covered?
I think Ken and I are both incredibly lucky to be able to represent some of the citizens, and in Ken's case, all of the citizens of Woburn. So we're very grateful to you for having us here today, and
Well, we think the
wish you
shoe's
well
on
in
the
the
other
decision,
foot,
so.
too.
Yes, we really
We're lucky
appreciate
to
you
have
coming.
you, so.
well, thank you.
And we're lucky to
Thank you.
have you tonight, too. I want to thank you for coming, and I enjoyed the conversation very much.
Great.
Thank
Thanks.
you for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
And we're always glad to be here and talk about issues that are concerned. And I think that people have a big decision to make, and hopefully they'll keep an open mind and understand that to have a great community, you have to invest in it.
Absolutely.
I suppose it'd be appropriate, since we're sitting here in the Woburn Public Media Studio, to say that the community has made an enormous investment in having this studio here and having this facility here at the high school. And it was a brilliant investment that is paying dividends with every passing day. So my thanks to Woburn Public Media and to all you volunteers who are standing here in the studio for the great job that you do and the great service you provide.
I could not agree with that more.
Great.
Well, thank you again.
Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.